Kurosawa, there's John Ford, there's Wells, and in that same sense, there's Fellini. But Fellini had something very special, and it was a particular vision of the world that was at once started in a sense with poetic realism, in a way, with La Strada, and as it developed, became somewhat more abstract in terms of its imagery, but ultimately very, very stylized, extremely stylized visual images. But he created, unlike, I think, I must say, probably more than anybody else, he created his own world with music, Nino Rota's music, the look of people, the way they turned, the way they moved, camera movements. He created his own world, ultimately in pictures like Dolce Vita 8½, Juliet of the Spirits, Amarcord, Casanova, Satyricon, which is probably the most extreme of that example. So much so that the word Fellini-esque became a common word to describe something on the surface, you can say bizarre or strange, but actually really like a painter working on film. There's no doubt, Rear Window is a film you can watch again and again also. Again, the story doesn't matter. You know all the facts, you know what's going to happen, you know the plot, but it's the way, I think, two things. Again, the way Hitchcock shows it, which means where he aims the camera, what he puts in the frame, how he moves it, how he doesn't move it, use of color, and Jimmy Stewart's character, who morally is on the edge, you see. Should he be doing what he's doing? It's none of his business, you know. It really is none of his business. What kind of a guy is this? And he's our hero. You know, we have to go through with him. And I think that's something, again, that only Stewart could have pulled off. Now, you like him, because he's a very genial guy in the beginning of the picture, you know. But he goes off on some perverse trip, you know. It's very odd.
He knew me. Others, I think, had their own way of what cinema is. They had their own approach to what cinema is. The auteurist thing was the auteurist idea was very important to us because it made us find beauty in films that were considered, smugly considered beneath foreign films or beneath serious filmmaking. And it was really interesting. As an American, most of our cinema comes out of a commercial system, and yet some beautiful works of art were created in that system. And you had filmmakers, producers in the case of Selznick and others, making extraordinary films within a system. Particularly directors, I think. A lot of directors and writers are really working that way, tying up with stars and working out with the stars becoming like their alter egos in a way. So what I'm saying is that at the time that Bergman films were shown and Fellini films were late 50s, before the New Wave, American films were looked at with contempt, and pretty much dismissed. I mean, films, couldn't see any silent films, right. But you could see films from the 30s, although they weren't that good because the prints were terrible. 40s and 50s, outraged. People laughed them off the screen. And so when Saris brought over the auteur theory, that helped us appreciate who we are, and also where we came from in terms of telling stories with pictures and narrative within that system, you see. And the genres, too. It doesn't mean we could do them, and it doesn't mean everything that one director made was a great film. The old thing with the auteurs was more provocateur in a way, which was that the worst film of Raoul Walsh is better than the film of so-and-so, you know, and the best film of so-and-so. And that was just a way of really pushing and trying to take the center away, and in a way, what's up there, you know, you're up there, if you're up there in front, you're going to get hit. You're going to get hit. And so some people were hit unfairly. Some great filmmakers were hit unfairly by those auteurs. But the thing about it, it made us appreciate the others. And over the years, we came back to the ones that were supposedly hit. But in any event, no, some critics have their own agenda, and they have their own way of approaching cinema, what they think art is.
On a big screen at the Capitol Theater in New York with my friends who were 15 years old. And even though the film was not received well at the time, we responded to the film very strongly. Didn't know why. Couldn't really tell why. Couldn't tell what was happening. But we really went with the picture and remembered it. And it took years for us to see it again. But there's a sequence in that film where he's just following, Jimmy Stewart's following Kim Novak in her car. and it's just shot after shot. Him driving. It's how he's composed in the center of the frame, how she's composed. It's the serenity of the camera positions. I'm not saying that just to be a contraire, to some of the murder scenes in Psycho and that sort of thing. Yeah, I like watching those, and the actual shower scene in Psycho I use as a template for some of the for one of the big moments in Raging Bull for a fight scene as a template. But I'm finding that over the years, the scenes that stay with me are the seemingly quieter scenes, the scenes where it appears that not much is happening with the Hitchcock film. And it's all happening there in him, the obsession of following her everywhere she goes with that car. It's a beautiful sequence. And of course, Bernard Herrmann's music doesn't hurt it.
One thing, you go to movies to be involved in the picture, to get a sense. I want to lose myself up in that screen for a few hours, and in a sense, know what it's like to be human. Then you come across certain kinds of films that, when you go to the theater and when you see them, you're completely surprised. They make you look at life a different way. They make you look at being human a different way. They touch areas that you don't want touched sometimes. It's provoke you. And then there's that rarest of films where, when you see it continually over years, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you still see more in it. And what's even better is that if you're making pictures, you go back to this source for A, inspiration, and B, maybe it should be A, is to learn. To learn. And remember, when you get tired, especially if you make 10 or 12 films in your life, and you get tired, you say, why? How can I get that better? What can I do? You look at that source, you look at that inspiration, you say, well, Kubrick wouldn't let it stay this way. Yes. He would have changed that angle. He would have worked it out. He would have tried to figure out getting more time to shoot the scene this way or that way. He would have really seen it to its end. For that inspiration, I must say, it's looking at his films. And there's many ways I look at his films besides on a big screen. I like watching them on television. I like watching with the sound off. Sometimes you can see the rhythm of the cutting and the camera moves. And when he cuts in a two-shot conversation, the classic one is Mr. Grady crossing the invisible line. The cuts, and when he destroys the invisible line, and when the shot gets tighter, on which line of dialogue.
But I mean, the film is it really is a very moral film, La Dolce Vita, and it's about the loss of innocence, and it examines that lifestyle. It also examines, where Italy is at that time, 1959. But 8.5. I mean, La Dolce Vita was the set piece. It was 3 hours long. There were episodes. There was no story. And there was a major break with a major stylistic break with his previous films, Nights of Cabiria, Vitelloni, Il Bidone, and La Strada. So when he made 8.5, he went about 10 light years further, more than anybody else, I think. I think the only other person, there's a number of great filmmakers, but Ingmar Bergman's Persona is the other film where when he made Persona, he jumped to another level, another perception. And 8.5 was so extraordinary. I remember seeing it on 57th Street at the Festival Theater as soon as it opened, and trying to capture it. I went home and drew pictures from it. Luckily, I had seen it about 4 weeks before I shot my very first short film at NYU, and I just wanted to capture, first of all, the camera movement. Yeah. Always keep the camera moving, because it became choreography in the way the camera moves, and the camera moving in and out. The use of blacks, very strong blacks against white, the contrasts, the cutting back and forth through time and memory and dreams. At first, we try to study the film after seeing it for the first time to try to figure out what was going on, and then you realize you don't have to. Of course, some of the public was confused when I walked out of the theater that night. A woman was standing in the street trying to get a taxi. She goes, "Did you just see that film?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What did you think of it?" I thought it was great. She goes, "Well, I don't think it was very good. Maybe some good photography." She said, "That's about all. I don't understand what the hell it's about." Yes. But but it became extremely famous. So it really is still, to this day, a film that a lot of people can learn from.
I have very strong feelings about Barry Lyndon and about 2001. And those two, out of Lolita, out of Clockwork Orange, out of Eyes Wide Shut, and that sort of thing. But 2001, it's a strange thing. I mean, when I started the Capitol Theater here, as I said, when his name, of course, there was a great deal written about the film, or written about the mystery of the film before it was released. And so when I went to see it, I expected much more than a film. And as I said, we got it, And I think I guess I've been very affected by religion in my life, and that side of me found an extraordinary kind of comfort in the end of the film.
I first saw this film, Alfred Hitchcock's adaptation of Dial M for Murder, which is based on this stage play by Frederick Knott. I saw it on its first release, and like most people at the time, I saw it in 2D, 2 dimensions, flat. Because, of course, the big 3D craze was 1953. All of Hollywood's first 3D pictures, Born a Devil was the first, House of Wax, Inferno, Phantom of the Rue Morgue, they were all made around 53, 54. But after CinemaScope came along, 3D was dropped. Didn't have to wear the glasses with scope. Now, Hitchcock's film was made in 53, but it was released in 54, and therefore was more widely seen in a flat version, not in 3D. Now, in 1980, the picture was re-released in 3D. And when we saw it then, it was a revelation. What at the time seemed like a really good Hitchcock picture suddenly became, I think, a great one, something I went back to over and over again, even in flat version. When I saw it in 3D, Hitchcock, it seemed to use the 3D very expressively, and somehow the emotions, it deepened the emotions within this small apartment in Mayfair in London where the action is mostly set. Every chair, every table, all the distances between the people become very charged. And the 3D brings the sort of the inner worlds of the characters within their living space very, very, very close to the audience. When I watch the picture, I wind up sort of feeling my way through the apartment, becoming familiar with it in the way that, I become familiar with the spaces where I live and work. First film I showed to the crew was Dial M for Murder. I had no prejudice, or not prejudice, the wrong word, but I had no expectations. In those days, too, you just went to the movies. And whether it was good or bad, it was up to you. For example, if I saw at the age of 12 Magnificent Obsession by Douglas Sirk, I didn't get it. It took me 20 years later, you see. But on the other hand, I see A Place in the Sun, and I see, practically The Heiress, and The Bad and the Beautiful, and Sunset Boulevard, and films of that, all around the same time. And I had that experience. So if you're looking at Sunset Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard's kind of a horror film, so I shouldn't say that, but in a good way. But at the same time, you go to a smaller theater that had these wooden seats, and it was dirty, and there was a lot of gum on the floor and that sort of thing. For children, that cost 13 cents at the time, and you would see, Bomba the Jungle Boy, and a film called Great White Hunter. But it turns out that you think you're going to, at 10 or 11 years old, see another adventure in darkest Africa and that sort of thing. Instead, what comes up is The Macabre Affair, directed by Zoltan Korda. And that's based on an Aldous Huxley story, The Gioconda Smile. And it stars Gregory Peck and Robert Preston and Joan Bennett, with the score by Miklos Rozsa, and it's psychologically disturbing film. But it was advertised as Great White Hunter because they had to re-release it. And so you never knew what you're going to see repeatedly. The Big Heat by Fritz Lang, Murder by Contract, what I'm getting at is that it seemed that we were able to absorb different kinds of films, and we weren't necessarily told, now this is a special film, this you have to really pay attention, sort of like Eat Your Spinach, later on, yes, there was a certain thing we're saying this is a special picture, even like to a certain extent, like Shane, for example. I was 12 years old, and we knew that was special, and it does hold up. It's a beautiful film. So that, along with the Italian films that I saw, when I was growing up. I was 5 or 6 with the Italian neorealist films on television in New York, and sharing that with my family, sharing it. I mean, I was there. They came on TV and with the subtitles, and they were speaking in television the same way my grandparents were speaking, and I saw my grandparents reacting, and I realized we're them. But it's movies, but it's a different kind of movie, and similar with the British cinema at that time. We saw so much of quarter films, and not the early Hammer was later, but late 40s, a great deal of quarter was sold to American television. So we just grew up with, for example, The Private Lives of Henry VIII, and that was restored ultimately by the Film Foundation at some point. But what I'm getting at is that I was getting all these other a sense of other cultures coming in through cinema, so that it opened me up to all kinds of cinema. Particularly when I saw, for example, I was maybe 15 when I saw Pater Panchali on television in New York, dubbed in English, and I realized, I always tell the story, I realized, because I had loved Renoir's film The River, and I saw it when I was about 10 or 11, and I realized this was a film made by the people in that film who are usually in the background. And it was made by them, for them. And in so doing, the whole world. And so that, in a way, being open to all kinds of cinema, even if it was the American underground cinema, Stan Brakhage and early Shirley Clark, or Michael Snow's Wavelength, or these, just be open to it. I would have friends who would get angry. I said, no, just try to go with it. And so not necessarily making films like that, but being around that creativity was quite extraordinary in the New York Underground, for example, especially at the New York Film Festival. So it was really a matter of being open to all cultures and all ways of thinking and all ways of telling a story with pictures. And that, for me, eliminated, I remember telling some wonderful Italian filmmakers whom I loved that I liked Mario Bava. They were furious at me. They were furious. And no, the color and this and that, that's horrible trash. But I didn't understand the Italian culture. When I did, it was the 70s. I didn't quite get it. I'm still American. I didn't grow up with them. I didn't grow up. Their families would have poets in their families and great philosophers. I hadn't read Manzoni until only a few months ago, because it's a new translation. Kane is a very important picture for the sound era. Wells was the one to formulate the level to which films should aspire to, I think, or the freedom, the sense of freedom. I look at the Citizen Kane, I kind of think of Rosebud as a mystery thread, and somehow it's resolved, and it's resolved beautifully in the flames at the end. Looking back, I've seen the film now over the past 20 years, 25 years over and over again, 30 years maybe. Yeah, 30 years over and over again. I guess the beauty of the Rosebud idea that stays with you is the lost innocence, the melancholy, the inspiration that you had in you when you were young, and how it changes and how it survives or doesn't survive in your own estimation. And that initial spark that you want to hold on to the end of your life, and how it eludes some people and how it seemed to elude him. Kane was a picture that made you think that anything was possible on film, and that's important. That's important, especially because film production is so hard, it's so difficult, that it's very easy to be snowed under and to be, you in yourself too. You get to a point where you're shooting something for so long, and somebody says, "I'd like to try something," and say, "No, that's really hard to do. You can't do that," and you accept it. At least in that, when you see Kane, luckily I was young enough to see Kane, you never accept any of that. You just try for it, and I think that's what the sense of ambition in the film was very strong. The ambitious sense of the picture, of wanting to be everything that film could be, stretching the limits of film, and I think that's what's always inspiring about the film. Wells was a beacon in a way, and was someone you could keep looking towards, someone whose work constantly surprised you and enriched you. It was like a teacher.
Hello, Mr. Ralston. She won't talk. The second Mrs. Kane, about Rosebud or anything else.
I believe he's been quoted as saying that when he went to work on the film, he told the people working around him to do things they were told they could never do. The first time I saw Citizen Kane was on Channel 9 in New York. I think I was 15 years old, and it was at the age when I was
beginning to associate certain names with films that I liked. What Citizen Kane really did for me was to show what that name on the film did. In other words, Wells was the one, through Citizen Kane, to make me understand what a director did in a film, where he placed the camera, the energy of the film editing, the performances. All of this had a certain mark and a stamp that was unmistakable. When I first saw it on Channel 9, it was edited. But I didn't know. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because it was so arresting. It was so shocking. I really, of course, fell in love with that wide-angle lens, too, in movement, constantly in movement. That was fascinating to me. And then I finally got to see it in the theater, at the Thalia Theater in New York, seeing for the first time the scenes that I hadn't seen on television, particularly the March of Time sequence.
You, on the mark!
And when it came up was quite shocking, and how the March of Time sequence developed in the film. And I hadn't seen that before ever. And it was really, really extraordinary. It affected my early films.
Before she divorced him?
I made a film called It's Not Just You, Murray at New York University. All the techniques used in It's Not Just You, Murray kind of found their way again in Goodfellas, which all comes from the spirit of the March of Time sequence. The sense of just breaking the rules and stopping the movie and throwing a documentary in the middle and giving you all that exposition. And couching it in terms of the excuse of it being a documentary that you see in the newsreel and in the movie theater. The other thing, of course, I noticed with long takes, he did it, well, of course, he shares the title card with Greg Tolan, director of photography and directed by, are on the same card. He did it using deep focal length lenses where everything seemed to be in focus from the foreground all the way back to the background. And I found that to be fascinating, too, and constantly trying to compose, I find in my own mind, trying to compose shots like that, and of course, without those lenses, without that lighting, it's very difficult. I really enjoyed the montage of the film a great deal. For example, in that opera scene, begins with her leg going across the frame, I think, and the camera is on the stage looking out to the audience, the light bulb dying out, and the opera singer's voice fading away, and it's really a suicide attempt. And I think that's so wonderful. Our time is compressed in that. I also like the scene in Mr. Bernstein's office when he talks about seeing the young girl in a boat once in his life, and there hasn't a day gone by that I haven't thought about that young girl. And I also like the line of dialogue in which Bernstein says, listen, there's no trick to making a lot of money if all you want to do is make a lot of money. That makes a lot of sense,
It's hard for me to keep up with a lot, but Joanna Hogg's films, for example, I like some of the wildness of the Ben Wheatley pictures. There are so many coming out of England, I think. Lynn Ramsey. There are really a number of wonderful films. My fear, more than fear, my observation is that the filmmakers of substance need support. And the problem is the amusement park films. The problem is that, which is something that's been pointed out for the past number of years now. But now I think, in effect, they've got real cinema on the run, so to speak. It's very difficult for films of substance or attempted, how should I say? I don't want to use the word personal vision, but I have. It doesn't mean it's not entertaining, right? But these projects, where can they be shown? Where can they be shown if the theaters are taken over by the well-made, beautifully made, animated pictures, in a sense? Yeah, I mean, it's not, I was saying this in New York, and people were saying, oh, you don't like those films. It's not that I don't like them. First of all, I haven't seen many. I tried to, but I wasn't interested. The thing about it is that they seem to be creating, it's another form. It's another form. And their theaters are almost like amusement parks in a sense. So these films now, I think, are more like theme rides, in a way. And it's a different experience for an audience. Now, that audience could also appreciate narrative film. A narrative could be a film that could be made by the Turkish filmmaker Ceylan, or as I say, Joanna Hogg, different types of pictures that don't necessarily depend on heavy special effects and how should I put it, comic book heroes. See, but I come from a time when movies were films. Now, some were genre. Years later, we realized, well, within the genre, certain things were able to be expressed, certain
personal style developed, not all the time, but very often, and then one could appreciate the genre for what it is. And that's what I'm saying about the theme park films. For what they are, they can be appreciated, but that's not the only thing. You follow? And we have, it's our obligation to try to make that clear to that audience.
The tradition of the Western, 1917, John Ford, William Wyler making one-reelers each week. Cecil B. DeMille coming in and literally, with the Western, creating a new language. Not even mention Griffith and Thomas Ince and people like that who were already working. These guys was trying to figure out, if you come in left to right, what's the next cut? What's the right screen direction? You know, they didn't even have the word for screen direction. They were inventing all this language, you know? And so that the Western is a part of Americana that I'm not a part of. I come from a East Coast. I'm more European than that, you know, and it's in a funny, I mean, my roots are more towards Italy or Europe than it is up west. I loved seeing Westerns when I was a kid because that was the outdoors for me, especially those old Technicolor Westerns or any story, any Cinecolor film about wild horses was great because, you know, beautiful wild horses running. You could see these palominos going by and that sort of thing. But I could never go near a horse. I would sneeze.
The first John Ford Wayne film that I can remember seeing on a big screen, and this was after seeing maybe a few bits and pieces on television, maybe Fort Apache, a little bit of Stagecoach maybe. I remember dying to see Stagecoach. I was 5 years old and was on a re-release, and I only saw the trailer, but my parents wouldn't take me. It was it was one of those things, and to this day, in my mind, I've never really seen the film, you know, because if I'd seen it then, it would have been something just embedded in my brains in a way. But the very first one that I saw was The Quiet Man, and it was 1952. I was 10 years old. It was on a Saturday afternoon, Lowe's Theater, 6th Street, 2nd Avenue, and the place was in an uproar. A warm, wild film, very funny, and I must say, visually, one of the most beautiful things ever put on film. I mean, along with that and The Red Shoes and the river, Renoir's The River, it's an extraordinarily beautifully made, beautifully shot film. I understand it was misty and rainy all the time, but boy, did that help, that Technicolor. And a sense of authenticity of the people, of the place, and also a film that's in very, very strong need of restoration right now. Hopefully we can pull that off one of these days. But in any event, it was a very moving experience, but it was a wonderful experience for young people too. It was full of life and great deal of humor and characters that, even though we came from an Italian-American background, we're beginning to feel an affinity with the nature of the Irish and the Irish-American in the films the way John Ford portrayed them. And I mean this also, my parents watching Ford films on TV, watching How Green Was My Valley, for example, was something that was universal in terms of all families, working class families. This is something that sustained Ford all the way through for me and was a major influence on me because of that. But The Quiet Man is just decidedly Irish, there's no doubt about that. But you know, The Quiet Man is a picture that there are issues with, and you need a whole other show just on that one film. The way the people behave, and the nature of the taking of the wife, the nature of the battling, the physical conflict between Wayne and O'Hara, you know. But it all seems to me, you know, which is certainly politically incorrect today, but it all seems to me, dealing with Victor McLaughlin, brother, the sense of honor, sense of dignity, a sense of ritual. A sense of ritual from a time and a place. That ultimately she takes that bat, there's a shillelagh, whatever it is, that an old woman gives Wayne to beat her up with, the wife, you know, and at the end she takes it after all the battling is over. She takes it and throws it away. He's not going to touch her. She wins, you know. The beauty about Ford is the dignity of pride, but also the downfall of pride. And you see this, the downfall, the dignity, the good and the bad side of being proud. And you see this beautifully in The Quiet Man. You see it on every character, particularly Victor McLaughlin. This whole business of the dowry, this whole business of the Donnybrook that they start and people come watch, some sort of ancient ritual in a way
that smashes right up against today's concept, especially in America, of how people should behave. And rightly so, rightly so.
And also about the human spirit. I mean, I must say his films are so moving. I tried to show my young daughter 8½. She's now 17. At the age of 16, I said, I have to show you 8½, because it's very important to me in 1963 when I first saw it. But then I realized that I couldn't just show her 8½. It wouldn't mean anything in terms of style. I had to start somewhere else. So I started with La Strada, which is the film I first saw of Fellini's, and then showed her La Strada, Nights of Cabiria, La Dolce Vita, then 8½. And next I'll show her Satyricon and move on up. So you can see the work and the journey of one artist on using film and cinema as his tool.
And what did you want to tell her? I mean, the film speaks for itself about La Strada, because we have a clip here. And what do you want to say about this work which impressed you as a young man?
Well, I remember seeing the film, of course, when I was about 12 years old, and at that time,
young teenager,
yeah, as a young teenager, yeah, and at that time, it was shown in theaters in America, dubbed in English, just like a regular film, because you had Anthony Quinn in the picture and Richard Basehart, and in a sense, it's the poetry of the picture, the warmth, the power of it. It's the road of life. The famous Fellini road of life. Everyone walking on that road at the end, winding up at the seashore.
Yeah, but the tension between the fool and the character.
Well, in terms of that, that's what I love the character of the brutal character played by Anthony Quinn, who loves but can't express it. Yeah. If he can express, it's through brutality. And the wonderful character, the fool, played by Richard Basehart, who always goes a step too far, step too far and another step too far, teasing Zampano, and eventually it's his undoing. And in a way, they're archetypical of people. Yeah. In a way, they're almost abstractions of certain kinds of people. In my films later went more towards the fool. I found the characters like in Johnny Boy and Mean Streets pushing all the time, and knowing he's going to get hurt, but still can't help pushing just a little.
As a filmmaker, you have to tell a story to the audience. And in so doing, you have to translate it through an image, which means that you direct the eye and the heart to look in a certain way, the way you want it to be, the way you want them to see it. And I never saw anybody tell a story that way. Pretty much every one of the films, you can study the shots. First of all, you don't go study the shot. You go look at the movie and it affects you or doesn't affect you. Yeah. They affected me. And then I went back, when I began to learn more about filmmaking, I went back and I kept saying, why is that one so powerful? Why is it so powerful? I went back and I tried to trace backwards the shots. And then eventually I started making films before there was video. So I had to do this going from theater to theater, So it was a different thing. I was trying to write down notes. Why does something stay with you for so many years? Why did the tracking shots and Paths of Glory stay with you? It's really a person with a very strong, powerful storytelling ability, talent, genius, who could create a solid rock image that has conviction. What's in that frame stays in that frame. What isn't in the frame is out. And that's it. You have to compose within that frame. I didn't know he was a still photographer before. I've read over the years, Steve Spielberg told me about him and that sort of thing. And I said, of course, the still photography, once you get that image, but then it moves. Still cameras don't move, It had this extraordinary authority saying, look, I'm gonna tell you the story this way, and you're gonna see it this way. Then you add to that, what I feel about his pictures, when you add to that, assuming there's good and there's bad, assuming something is wrong and something is right, well, what are we ultimately? As human beings, are we fundamentally good? Are we fundamentally bad? I think there's where you. That's why you can watch these films again and again and again. The Shining is fascinating for that. It's really all going on in his head, Jack's head. Yeah. But those scenes that's so. Well, even Eyes Wide Shut, with the husband touching areas that he probably should have left alone. Being too confident about himself in a relationship. Remarkable film. Remarkable. And the more you see Eyes Wide Shut, the more you get involved in that world. At a certain point you don't want to because it's too painful. But it stands up. Bertolucci was saying this in Rome. You'd come off the style, a wonderful style coming out of England, I think, Richard Lester, The Hard Day's Night, The Beatles. the way MTV is affected now, films, MTV cutting, commercials were affecting, I think, oversimplification, I guess, but commercials were affecting cinema editing and logic in a way, continuity at the time. And Richard Lester was like in the forefront of that, and the knack and how to use it, and knack and how to get it, I should say. And when 2001 came out, everything screeched the other way. It was amazing because it simply stopped how you normally would experience time and forced you again, with great authority, to look at a world, part of it in conjecture, part of it based in scientific fact, but to take you somewhere else completely where you've never been before, and it really made you, immersed you in the drama. I thought one of the great murder scenes of all time is the destruction of Hal. Extraordinary murder scene, really. His murdering of the other scientists who were sleeping, or just as malfunction, you know, and the red. You begin realizing it's a person it's this machine taking their lives. But again, basically, as I say, it's a murder scene. But look how it's done.
You know, but I think what we're really talking about is that it's not just movies. That they're not just movies to me. They're, in many respects, having had asthma, my father taking me to the movie theater constantly because I couldn't play sports or anything. He never really talked to me very much when I was a kid, and so that was a way of talking. That was a way of experiencing strong emotional, whether it was Kirk Douglas and Lana Turner in The Bad and the Beautiful, or it was James Mason in The Desert Fox, or it was On the Town, or American in Paris. You know, any of these things. It was a way of experiencing emotion, of feelings. If I wanted to say I loved you to him, which I didn't, it was through that film, you see. And same way with him to me. And my mother to a certain extent also, my older brother too. And so in a funny way, they're not just movies to me. It was a way of expressing emotion and a way of learning a little about life, and using these as examples of how to live. You can't take, I mean, not every film. What I mean by that is that it's like, it becomes about life. The pictures I make, I'm talking about, it becomes about the fact that, yes, I adore these old movies and everything, because I can never make them. I wish I could have, but I'm not. I'm what I am. I do what I do now. And in the process of making the picture, I tried to learn about myself, learn about life. And we try to find the truth in those things, and because the truth is enjoyable and painful and a lot of fun.
Well, I think for me, I naturally had an enthusiasm to want to share an experience with other people. And whether that's a performance that you see in theater, or for me, it was not necessarily theater because I came from a background where I couldn't afford to go to theater. So it was in cinema or movie theaters at the time in the 40s and 50s into the early 60s. So I had an enthusiasm, really, and I wanted somebody to share that and enjoy it with he or she all together, you know. And I also found that at a certain point, when I started to make short films and everything, or get others interested in the same films I was interested in, and there'd be discussions and arguments, and something would come out of that. But primarily, by the time I did Mean Streets and other films, I began to get very, very excited by sharing as much as possible my experience with younger filmmakers. And then, when they came back and showed me their films, when I saw their films, and I know that, and I had a kind of almost a little bit of a feeling of pride that I influenced a couple of people by not necessarily my films, by recommending other films. And then from their films, I get re-inspired. It opens up a whole world. You know, it could be light years different from what I do. I don't care, you know. But I still have that. I have no, I always thought of myself more as a teacher than as a filmmaker. The main thing was that if the camera's booming down on a Roman legion entering the gates of Rome, the Roman wall, the first frame is a high angle and you see them way in the distance. The second frame is over their backs and you're going towards the gate, and the third frame is they're entering the gate. What they didn't understand is all one shot. And I explained it's moving. They said, no, it's still. I said, no, it's moving. In between the pictures, it moves. You see, now when I do a similar thing with the DP, and the DP looks and says, in between the pictures, we're going to move. I still got to light it, you know. But in my mind, the pictures moved, you know. It has to begin to, I think, reach younger people at an earlier age, for them to shape their minds in a critical way way of looking at these images and what they mean, and how to interpret imagery. And I think in a more official way, I think, than just punching up on a computer or seeing something on a TV commercial or something like that. I think you really need to know. You need to know how ideas and emotions are expressed through a visual form. You know, I come from a working class family. My mother and father weren't well educated. I was second generation, I guess, Italian American. And there was no tradition of reading in the house, no books. Of course, I read in school, etc., read books in school and that sort of thing, but there was more of a visual tradition, and more if I was taken to movie theaters a lot. So it was mainly visual literacy, what was happening at that time to me. I did not understand that was happening. What it made me realize was that there was an intelligence, another kind of intelligence, that was trying to tell a story through where the director, the writer, and the cinematographer, where they were focusing your eyes. You know, whether it was the camera may be on an extremely low angle, looking up at you. The use of the lens, the size of the lens. I began to understand certain lenses interpreted the story differently. A longer lens crushed everything together and made it flat. A wider lens stretched everything and sometimes distorted it. But I was beginning to understand that certain tools you use, and those tools become part of a vocabulary that's just as valid as that vocabulary that is used in literature. And so film is very powerful. Images are very powerful, I should say, and we have to begin to teach younger people how to use them.
Vertigo then. I said, well, you see, Vertigo's interesting. I said, because in a way, when I first saw it with my friends, we again came in the middle, didn't matter, you know, watched the whole film. We thought it was good, we didn't know why. We didn't say, gee, this is better than Man Who Knew Too Much. We didn't put it in that category. It was just another Hitchcock film, but there was something special about it. And over the years, we kept watching it again and again, and I think it has to do with the character. I think it has to do with the obsession of the character. And it's something that, it doesn't matter. The story doesn't matter at all. You'll watch that film repeatedly and repeatedly because of the way he takes you through his obsession and the kind of man he is in that film. Therefore, it's a picture, I think, that of Hitchcock's that is one of his greatest, if not his best, because you can keep watching it and watching it. It's always new because you go through that journey with him in his own soul.
It became a lost film, so to speak, and I ain't talking about all the filmmakers in the 70s were trying to find copies of it. Some people had 16s, so it became a picture you were looking for. I can't really say that I believe the plot, and I don't take any of the story seriously. I mean, as a realistic story. So the plot is just a line that you can hang things on. And the things that he hangs on, they're all aspects of, cinema poetry. And that's a film that I can't really tell where things start and end. I don't care. Or when he's following her in the streets in the car. What is he looking for? What is he looking for? The city itself is a character. The architecture itself. The mystery of old San Francisco. That painting. This whole business of remaking her, yes, we get it. Everyone's talking about the fetishism of it. Fine, it's good. But it's this extraordinary sense of loss that he's trying to fill that void. Maybe it reaches out to everyone because of that. We could bring our own sense of melancholy or loss to it. That kiss is so extraordinary. That's the one moment where he gets some kind of fulfillment. And then after that, it's time to go. It's a world that he creates that reflects, I think, what it is to be alive and what it is to live in fear. A good fear, a natural fear, but fear just the same, of just the human condition, of who we are. But it's more than a story. It's more than a story. It really is like living a lifetime with him. Could you still play an audience the way Hitchcock can? They do, but it's a different audience, and it's a different plane. See, the audience has been raised on films which are very loud, which have a climax every 2 seconds. Right. The scene with John Gavin and Janet Leigh in the beginning.
What do I do with my 3
The element there is the bra. Okay. But it's shot very simply, but ominously. There's something ominous about it. The scenes in the office are kind of all right, you know. But that Texan, for his style, the blandness of the scenes and the blandness of the framing is just really a kind of a bridge to get you to the next major moment. I think his instinct is right in telling stories like that. How benign can we make these images that just connect the dots? The best scenes for me are ones he must have spent time on, the driving shots. You had to spend time on those, particularly the points of view somehow. And the framing of Janet Leigh in the center of the frame with the top of the steering wheel and the bottom of the frame. Because you can make a choice. You can go above the steering wheel, you know, or you can go further out. But then maybe you won't see her eyes as well. So that's like the perfect size. The scene with the policeman. Of course, the framing of him staring into the car. Yes, we know with the glasses he's scary. But there's something about the restraint of those frames. See, and the more you restrain, the better it is when the explosion happens. And on the way to the explosion, there are these meditative states driving. And there's a sense of movement ahead. She steals money, then she decides to drive away, then she becomes guilty about it. Then she meets this guy in a motel and he's telling her all his problems. You're watching, you want to know what happens. She's gonna bring that money back? Now what is Anthony Perkins really gonna do? You know, he has his mother there. Maybe there's gonna be this whole thing going on with the mother and him and her. I mean, you're taken down a path. But what's great about it is that all your expectations are taken and turned upside down. At that time, as it is now, we expect certain things. And it took storytelling at that time and says, no, I'm not gonna give you that. I'm gonna give you something else. Because you think everything is so cool. You have the end of the 50s, the 60s are gonna look glorious to us. I think it was really important for who we were then. You have Vietnam, you have World Revolution, you have everything that happened in the 60s, and the society has never been the same. That picture really touched upon that, I think, Psycho. Of course, you want everything so neat and wrapped up. Well, life isn't like that. Even the stories I'm going to tell you are not like that now. Well, what happened was that I became overly, not overly, but I say really ambitious about what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to phrase it. And I really wanted to be, when I saw Before the Revolution, Prima della Rivoluzione, by Bertolucci at the New York Film Festival, I wanted that. I wanted to be able to express myself that way. It had such a joy of not only filmmaking, but of life. And it had such depth of culture, but I don't come from that culture. I don't know the politics. I don't know, we go back to Dante, go back to Petrarch, and you really, and then dealing with the Charterhouse of Parma, all of this. But I wanted to be there, and I tried with Who's That Knocking right away, and I blew it completely. And I had to find a way of expressing myself from my own culture, ultimately. But what kept me going was, I think, the ambition and the determination to reach that level that I had seen in Before the Revolution. But there was also Bellocchio's film, Fist in the Pocket, I Pugni in Tasca, and then, of course, the great Accattone by Pasolini, which was similar to a lot of the people I knew growing up. And so, but the poetry and the background of these people was the antithesis of where I came from. So I had to learn it myself, and I had to figure a way to make a film about kind of myself and a few of my friends without getting into difficulties. And that took from 66 to, I'd say, 72, with scripting and trying different ways. Please take your time. No, in this, maybe it's not, maybe a lot of people won't go for that sort of thing, but I think if you invest the time, it might be enriching to your life, I think, whether you agree with the story or not. But it might be interesting to make you see, to take the time to see, and let the resonance carry.
Yep.
And I hope it's really important in our time now to focus.
Yes.
That's an important thing. And to ignore the mess, to push that away and focus. Maybe you could sit. Actually, what? You watch something on television for 3 or 4 hours straight. So why not?
It can be
Go
done.
to a theater, relax. If you get a nice theater, nice seats, and just go. Go with it. Let us take you into that world. Almost like a contemplation. Along with the films, there was also the advent of television, 1948, 49, and the heyday of really some of the best programming in American television, in the history of American television up to this point, with the 50s, 1950s. And so I saw a lot of television shows, but also films on television. Being working class family too, they didn't have enough money to go to the theater, so theater wasn't an option. Live stage shows. So it was mainly visual literacy. What was happening at that time to me. I did not understand that was happening. What it made me realize was that there was an intelligence, another kind of intelligence, that was trying to tell a story through where the director, the writer, and the cinematographer, where they were focusing your eyes. You know, whether it was the camera may be on an extremely low angle, looking up at you. The use of the lens, the size of the lens. I began to understand certain lenses interpreted the story differently. A longer lens crushed everything together and made it flat. A wider lens stretched everything and sometimes distorted it, especially if camera movement. I learned looking at certain pictures, particularly Wells's films, and William Wyler too, a wide-angle lens. Wyler used his wide-angle lens in a very strong, steady image. But Wells used that wide-angle lens, 18 millimeter, it turns out, very often, to move along the walls, and you really I felt as if the camera was flying, as if the story was flying by, you know. I didn't know why until I kept seeing the films again and again, and as I began to know a little more about what filmmaking was like and what cameras did, and I still didn't know who made the pictures, you know, but I was beginning to understand that there are certain tools you use, and those tools become part of a vocabulary that's just as valid as that vocabulary that is used in literature, in our language. One has to begin to, I think, reach younger people at an earlier age for them to shape their minds in a critical way of looking at these images and what they mean, and how to interpret imagery. And I think in a more official way, I think, than just punching up on a computer or seeing something on a TV commercial or something like that. I think you really need to know. You need to know how ideas and emotions are expressed through a visual form. Now that form could be video, you know, or film. It probably eventually would be digital video for a long time to come. But it still has the same rules, and it still has the same vocabulary, and it still has the same grammar, I should say. Really, the same grammar. And the grammar is panning left and right, tracking in or out, you know, booming up and down, intercutting a certain way, the use of a close-up as opposed to a medium shot. What is a medium shot? What is a long shot? All these sort of things, and how do you use all these elements and the different kinds of lighting, and how you use all these elements to make an emotional and psychological point to an audience. And I think we have to begin to teach our younger people how to use this very powerful tool, because we know film, the image, can be so strong for not only for good use, but also for bad use. Look at World War II, and look at the films that were made in Germany. Look at the great director, Leni Riefenstahl. Look at her Triumph of the Will, and how that really, the extraordinary ability she had as a filmmaker, how that helped shape the policies of the Third Reich. And of course we know what that led to. And so film is very powerful. Images are very powerful, I should say, and we have to begin to teach younger people how to use them, and and at least to begin to understand, to interpret them. I think it is good if a young person wants to express themselves and take a video camera and go out, they're going to find that they have to frame the image. And in framing the image, they're going to find that they have to interpret what they want to say
to an audience. Now, how do you point the audience's eye to look where you want them to look and to get the point, the emotional and psychological point that you want to get across to them? They're going to have to make that decision. The real making of the filmmakers when they look to that viewfinder to tell the story. And I don't mean just telling a story, man goes, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. No, I mean a story could be a story could be rain hitting a tree, leaves. That could be your story. Where do you begin to put the camera? Then let them see what they do. Then, yes, there's a curiosity in children and young people. They may try one or two and then they realize it's not for me and they move on. But there's one or two that realize that if I put the camera under this leaf and I see this drop of rain coming at, I get it in such a way. And if I wait for a certain hour in which the sun is glistening at that, who knows? May not be a filmmaker, may be a great painter. But you'll find that they will learn. They will learn as they do it. At the same time, with respect for the language of cinema itself, the history should be taught and the visual literacy should be taught, because there are others who are not going to be able to do that. There are others who can't afford to get a camera. And this is one of the things, where I came from, we couldn't afford any 8mm cameras or anything like that. I drew pictures. I imagined that they moved, but I drew them. Violence is an encompassing word. It's a word that takes in so much. It depends on the world you're depicting. It depends on the audience you're aiming for. And then there's the issue of your responsibility to the story and to the world that you're depicting. And if you're going to go on a realistic basis, let's say, where I came from, although it was good, hardworking people trying to raise a family respectably, there was a lot of organized crime, and I saw a lot of violence where I grew up. I just saw it. It was part of me. When it came time for me to make movies, I knew those films were not for children. That was a time before, that was a time with the rating system, but it was before cable television. I knew those films would never be shown on television. And if they were, they'd be edited to the point where they were unintelligible and I couldn't care less, because I wouldn't want them shown at 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night for a child of mine to see. The violence that I have in my pictures, and again, be self-criticized. People say, sure, the kind of violence you do, you think is all right, but if everybody else does it, you're criticizing them. But what we're talking about, the violence in my films, is not pleasant. It's not pleasant, and I've just finished a film. Now I'm working on this film right now, which is very violent, and it's not pleasant at all. And it's not. You reap what you sow in the stories I'm trying to tell, and I don't know any other way to show it. And there's also to deal with the very, very dangerous aspect of that adrenaline one has as young. That could be expressed many different ways, and some sort of excitement, whether it's sexual excitement or violence or whatever. There's that danger that one has to know. That's part of what it is being human, especially young, and that could go wrong. And when it goes wrong, this could happen. Now, the world I came from, the world I knew, or aspects, I should say, of the world I knew, it was a valid form of expression. That's the world that's the human condition. That is the human condition, and it's tragic. And it's set up in such a way that it will do us in as a species if we don't learn about it. I don't put it up there for people to enjoy it, And if they are enjoying it, they catch themselves enjoying it, and the characters pay for it. Watch the characters pay for it, particularly in Goodfellas, and in Raging Bull. In this film, The Departed, which I just finished also. Well, I think you have to make room for film and curriculum. I don't think it's time, and this is a key thing. We don't mean to be having young people take 2 hours of their time, or 3 hours of their time a week, or however the curriculum works, to just sit and enjoy a movie. No, this is a learning experience. That also doesn't mean that you take a notebook and you write down everything in the notes as you're watching the film, because you can't see the film. So what you're doing is training the eye and the heart of the student to look at a film in a different way by asking questions and pointing to different ideas, different concepts, suggestions. You're training them to think about a story that's told to you in visual terms in a different way. and to take it seriously. I don't say it's a great film. You can learn more from even a bad film. You know, and so this is why it's so important, I think, because so much of today's society is done visually and even subliminally for young people that it could be dangerous. And one has to know it's a very, very powerful tool.